Meeting your partner's parents can be nerve-wracking enough. But when they're wealthy, it's old money elites who've already decided they don't like you before even shaking your hand. The pressure becomes almost unbearable. That was exactly my situation. My girlfriend Sophia came from a world I barely knew, full of pristine mansions, country clubs, and unspoken rules that I wasn't sure I could ever learn. On the day I was supposed to visit the Prescott estate for the first time, I found myself in my cramped city apartment, pacing nervously in my only suit. My palms were slick with sweat despite the cold air from the window. Sophia's voice came through on the phone, low and urgent, as she rehearsed what I should say and do. She was terrified that my honest, blue-collar self, a proud mechanic, who owned his own garage, would be judged harshly by her parents, Richard and Eleanor Prescott. "Mark," she whispered, almost pleading, "when they ask what you do, don't say mechanic or garage owner. You're in specialized automotive management, and if they notice your hands, just say you've taken up some woodworking. As a hobby, promise me please, just for tonight, play the part." I tried to laugh it off, telling her, "Sophia, I'm a mechanic. I built my business from nothing." Her voice cracked with emotion. "I know. I'm proud of you too, but they're different. They won't understand. Just for this one evening, for me, can you pretend?" I swallowed my pride and agreed. Anything for her. I was ready to step into a role that wasn't mine, just to show her family the kind of man I could be, or at least the one they would accept. As I hung up, I glanced at the suit laid out on my bed, took a deep breath, and prepared myself for a night that would test every ounce of my patience and courage. I climbed into my vintage pickup truck, a vehicle I had painstakingly restored. With my own two hands, its paint gleaming, despite the miles of wear beneath the surface. The city's streets blurred behind me as I headed toward the sprawling countryside where the Prescott estate awaited. With every mile, the scenery shifted dramatically. The grimy concrete and graffiti of the city gradually faded, replaced by neat, suburban lawns, and eventually endless stretches of rolling green hills, dotted with horses grazing peacefully. The air smelled different, here cleaner, crisper, carrying a quiet sense of old wealth and tradition that made me feel like an intruder in someone else's story. My nerves hummed quietly in the background as I glanced at my watch. I was ahead. I've scheduled by a few minutes a small, surprising victory. Then around a long bend in the road, I saw it. A car pulled over on the gravel shoulder. But this wasn't any ordinary vehicle. It was a classic, a two-tone 1960s Rolls Royce silver. Cloud, its hood, raised in silent distress. Standing beside it was an elderly woman, the very picture of refined elegance. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, and she wore a tweed jacket with pearls that caught the fading light. She looked utterly helpless, staring down at the engine, with a mix of frustration and helplessness that spoke volumes. My first instinct was to keep driving. Sophia's voice echoed in my mind, "You can't be late, not today." But then a stronger voice inside me, the voice of the man who had built his life with grease and grit, refused to ignore someone in trouble. I pulled over, leaving my suit jacket behind on the seat, and approached her cautiously. "Trouble, ma'am?" I asked, trying to keep my tone calm and friendly. She looked me over my clean dress shirt, my suit pants, and nodded curtly. The engine had stopped suddenly, with a loud clunk, and started smoking. Her driver was supposed to follow. Her butt got lost. "Mind if I take a look?" I asked. After a moment's hesitation, she gave a slow nod. "Be my guest." As I lifted the heavy hood, the familiar smell of hot oil and aged metal filled my senses. This was my world. I was home. I leaned over the massive engine with practiced eyes, quickly spotting the culprit, a frayed wire on the distributor cap. A classic fault with this model. The fix would be simple for anyone who knew the ropes. I glanced at my clean hands and the pristine shirt I'd tried so hard to keep spotless. "It's just a loose connection, ma'am. I can have it patched up in about 20 minutes, I said, though I knew that meant getting my hands dirty, probably beyond what my outfit could handle. She studied me, a small wry smile playing on her lips. "If you can get this old beauty running again, I don't care if you end up covered in grease." Her voice held a quiet dignity, but also an unexpected warmth. I pulled my small toolkit from the truck and got to work. As I stripped the wire, reconnected it, and secured it with electrical tape, the engine sat silently under my fingers, waiting for revival. We talked while I worked. She asked no questions about my job, only about the car. Her knowledge surprised me. She loved this vehicle deeply, and it showed. Her sharp, intelligent eyes sparkled when I described the repair process. And for once, I wasn't just the grease-stained mechanic. I was someone who shared her passion. When I finished, I wiped my hands on a rag, now streaked with black oil. "Try it now, ma'am," I said. She slid into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine roared to life with a deep, satisfying growl, that unmistakable sound of a silver cloud waking from its slumber. A genuine smile spread across her face, lighting up her refined features. "Young man, you are a miracle worker," she said, her gratitude genuine and heartfelt. "How can I ever repay you?" "Knowing she's running again is thanks enough," I replied, my chest swelling with quiet pride. She nodded, a spark of respect in her eyes. As she drove away, the elegant old car gliding down the road like a queen on parade, I couldn't help but smile. But that smile faded quickly when I looked at my hands again, now thoroughly covered in grease. And then, at the clock, I was more than an hour late. The sun was dipping below the hills, and I still had miles to go before I could face the Prescotts. The stakes had just gotten higher. The drive to the Prescott estate was a mix of adrenaline and dread. With every mile closer, my mind churned through possible excuses to explain my tardiness and my less than pristine appearance. I rehearsed phrases in my head about the emergency with the vintage Rolls Royce, about helping a stranded stranger, but none felt convincing enough for the kind of people I was about to meet. The entrance to the estate was marked by towering stone pillars standing sentinel, their grandeur unyielding and silent. There was no gate, just a long, winding gravel driveway that seemed to stretch endlessly through immaculately trimmed gardens and perfectly manicured lawns. I parked my truck at the far end of a sweeping circular drive surrounded by a fleet of gleaming German luxury cars. My own vehicle felt like a humble rowboat beside yachts. My heart pounded in my chest as I forced myself to step out, the fresh air suddenly heavy with anticipation. I tried to wipe the stubborn grease from beneath my fingernails with a paper napkin, an utterly futile gesture that only smeared the black further. The grand front door, made of dark, polished wood, loomed before me. I rang the bell, its deep chime echoing through the vastness of the mansion. Moments passed like hours. Finally, the door swung open, revealing Sophia. Her face, once filled with hope and excitement during our video calls, was now a mask of shock and horror. Her wide eyes took in my disheveled hair, grease-stained hands, and smudged suit. "Mark," she whispered, voice trembling. "What happened to you? Are you okay?" I tried calling. I stammered my apology and began explaining how I had stopped to help an elderly woman whose vintage car had broken down. Before I could finish, two figures appeared behind her, Richa and Eleanor Prescott, her parents. They were every bit as imposing and unyielding as I had imagined. Richard, tall and silver-haired, wore a perfectly tailored smoking jacket, his face a frozen mask of cold disdain. Eleanor, elegant and immaculately dressed, eyed me with thinly veiled contempt. Their gaze shifted from Sophia's horrified expression to me, and their disapproval hardened into something colder, pure contempt. This was the moment I feared most, and it had arrived. Richard Prescott's voice cut through the tense air, sharp and cold as a winter frost. "So this is the mechanic," he said, eyes narrowing as he scrutinized me from head to toe. I swallowed hard, my rehearsed apologies suddenly seeming meaningless. "I'm very sorry for being late, Mr. and Mrs. Prescott," I began, my voice shaky. There was an elderly woman stranded on the road with a broken-down vintage car. I couldn't just leave her. Richard raised a hand to silence me before I could say more. "We are not interested in excuses. Punctuality is the bare minimum of respect in our world, something you have clearly failed to demonstrate on your very first visit." His wife, Eleanor, stepped forward, her gaze sharp and unforgiving. She looked at my grease-stained hands and the dirt on my suit with a disdain so palpable it made my skin crawl. "Sophia warned us you worked with your hands," she said, voice dripping with condescension, "yet you make no effort to hide it." How charmingly rustic. Their words felt like daggers, stabbing at my pride. I stood there, speechless, as the crushing weight of their judgment settled over me like a suffocating fog. Then Richard turned his attention to his daughter, his tone dripping with cold disappointment. "Perhaps it's best to reschedule this meeting, Sophia. When your friend can present himself with the dignity this household expects." With that, he turned away, dismissing me without a second glance. Eleanor gave a faint, cruel smile, the kind tea. With that, he turned away, dismissing me without a second glance. Eleanor gave a faint, cruel smile, the kind that promised I was beneath consideration. Sophia looked stricken, her eyes pleading with me as if silently begging for some miracle. Defeat was bitter. I had tried to play their game, only to lose spectacularly. My future with Sophia suddenly seemed as distant and fragile as a fading star. I started to turn away, the crushing realization that I had failed echoing through my mind. But then, just as my foot hit the first step off the porch, a sound cut through the silence, a deep, familiar growl of a classic V12 engine, the unmistakable roar of the Rolls Royce's V12 engine broke the heavy silence on the porch. Bright headlights swept across the perfectly trimmed lawn, casting long shadows over the tense gathering. Everyone froze. Richard and Eleanor's faces hardened into expressions of confusion and irritation at the interruption. Sophia's look shifted from despair to curiosity, her eyes wide with cautious hope. The sleek, two-toned silver cloud glided to a near-silent stop behind my modest pickup truck. For a moment, no one moved. Then the driver's door opened with a soft click. A sharply dressed chauffeur stepped out, his movements precise and practiced as he crossed to the rear passenger side. A pale, elegant hand, adorned with a massive sapphire ring, appeared first, followed by the slow, regal figure of the woman I had helped on the side of the road, the very woman whose broken-down car had cost me so much time, Matilda Prescott. Sophia's grandmother, and the undisputed matriarch of the Prescott family, stepped onto the porch with quiet authority. Her sharp eyes swept the scene, taking in the rigid, cold posture of her son-in-law, the flustered expression of her daughter, and finally, meek, grease-stained, disheveled but standing tall. Eleanor's voice cracked in surprise. "Mother, what are you doing here? We told you the driver would pick you up." Matilda ignored her daughter completely, her gaze fixed on the gathering before her. Then, with purposeful strides, she made her way to the bottom of the steps and stopped directly in front of me. Her eyes bore into mine, lingering on the grease-streaked hands and rumpled suit. A lesser man might have wilted under such scrutiny, but her look was not one of judgment. It was measured, analytical, as if she was assessing the worth of a finely crafted piece of furniture. Then a slow, knowing smile spread across her face, one filled with amusement and something deeper I couldn't quite place. "Richard," she said firmly, cutting through the stunned silence. "Eleanor. This young man whom you seem so eager to dismiss spent nearly an hour on the cold, damp roadside fixing my car after your driver got hopelessly lost." Richard tried to protest, voice uncertain and strained, but Matilda raised a hand to silence him. "A mess?" she repeated, raising an eyebrow with ironic amusement. "No, this is the mark of a man who is unafraid to work hard, who helps others, even when it inconveniences him. That, Eleanor, is a quality no amount of wealth can buy." She turned her gaze to her daughter, a clear rebuke. Then, without looking back, she extended her arm to me in a public gesture of alliance. "Come, Mark, join me for dinner. I've arrived just in time to save you from what promised to be a dreadfully dull and judgmental evening." I followed, stunned and grateful, up the steps and into the heart of the Prescott mansion. The real test had just begun, but this time I wasn't alone. Inside the Prescott mansion, the air was thick with a mixture of old wealth and quiet authority. The scent of polished wood, beeswax, and fine leather filled the vast marble foyer where we were greeted by Henderson, the butler. His eyes flickered briefly at my grease-stained hands and rumpled suit, a flash of disapproval quickly masked by professional courtesy once he saw Matilda at my side. "Matilda, you have returned," he said softly, bowing his head. "Yes, Henderson," she replied, crisply. "Please prepare a place for Mr. Mark O'Connell at my right hand." The butler's subtle surprise was almost imperceptible. This was the seat of honor, a place traditionally reserved for the family patriarch, Richard Prescott himself. We were followed by Richard and Eleanor, their earlier arrogance replaced by a subdued, almost resentful silence. Sophia came last, her face radiant with a mix of awe and relief. The dining room was nothing short of majestic, a cavernous space dominated by a long, polished table that seemed to stretch forever, set meticulously for 20 guests, though only the 5 of us were present. Matilda guided me to the seat of honor, her grip firm and confident on my arm. I felt like an intruder who had accidentally stumbled into a royal court and been mistaken for a visiting noble. The meal that followed was no ordinary dinner. It was a carefully orchestrated performance, with Matilda as the conductor and her children as the reluctant supporting cast. Her attention never wavered from me. She asked no questions about my bank account or my background. Instead, her curiosity focused sharply on my knowledge and passion for automobiles. "A 1960s silver cloud," she began, swirling the deep ruby wine in her glass. "A magnificent machine, but temperamental. The fuel pump is notoriously tricky. How do you maintain consistent pressure?" I answered honestly and confidently, speaking not just as a mechanic, but as a craftsman who loved his work. I shared stories of restoring engines, the joy of coaxing life back into old machines, and the patience required to nurture something beautiful and complex. Matilda listened intently, her sharp eyes never missing a detail. As the evening unfolded, the atmosphere shifted. What had begun as an evening fraught with judgment and anxiety transformed into one filled with respect and genuine connection. For the first time, I wasn't just Sophia's boyfriend. I was a man recognized for his skill, his heart, and the quiet dignity that comes from hard work. As the meal progressed, the icy tension that had gripped the room began to thaw, replaced by a subtle warmth that none of us had expected. Matilda's questions delved deeper, not just about cars, but about the values behind my work, the pride I took in craftsmanship, and the patience needed to nurture something delicate yet enduring. Richard and Eleanor, once the formidable gatekeepers of their daughter's world, now sat quietly, their earlier arrogance diminished into grudging respect. Sophia watched the change with a smile that softened the edges of the evening's earlier harshness. Matilda shared stories from her youth, revealing a side of the family I hadn't seen before, legacy of hard work beneath the polished veneer of privilege. She spoke of the importance of character over wealth, of kindness over status, and how true strength is measured not by one's bank balance, but by one's actions. It was a lesson I knew well, but hearing it from the matriarch of this ancient and powerful family made it feel like a quiet victory. The conversation shifted to laughter and shared memories, and for a brief moment, the mansion's grand walls felt less like a fortress and more like a home. By the time dessert arrived, a delicate tart that was almost too beautiful to eat, the atmosphere had completely transformed. I was no longer the greasy mechanic, the outsider with dirty hands and stained clothes. I was Mark, a man who had earned his place at the table not through wealth or status, but through integrity, kindness, and a willingness to stand firm in who he was. As I looked around the table, catching Sophia's eyes, I saw a reflection of hope and acceptance that made the trials of the evening worthwhile. That night, I learned that sometimes the hardest battles aren't won with money or power, but with honesty and heart, and in that grand mansion, under the watchful gaze of a woman who commanded respect without demanding it, I found something far more valuable than approval. I found belonging. The night slowly came to a close, and as the last of the wine glasses were set down and the soft glow of candlelight flickered, I felt a quiet sense of triumph settle over me. Matilda's unexpected intervention had shifted the entire course of the evening. Richard and Eleanor's cold disapproval had been replaced with a muted acknowledgement that perhaps this mechanic wasn't the liability they assumed he would be. Sophia reached across the table and took my hand, her smile radiant and full of gratitude. For the first time, I saw not just her love, but a deep, unwavering belief in who I was. Later, as we walked out into the crisp night air, the mansion behind us seemed less imposing. I realized that respect could not be bought or faked. It had to be earned through actions and integrity. The Prescott family's world was complicated. It's filled with unspoken rules and old traditions. But that night had taught me that sometimes a simple act of kindness and a genuine heart could bridge even the widest divides. I wasn't just a mechanic anymore. I was a man who had stood his ground, who had shown that strength comes from humility and courage. And as Sophia and I drove away, the stars twinkling overhead, I felt a quiet hope for the future one where I could be accepted for who I truly was, Greece and all. The night had started with dread and uncertainty, but it ended with something far more powerful: belonging.